Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the workshop. Today we're going to be making a little pencil pot for all the pens and pencils that I have here around the shed. Initially I was going to make a short out of this, but then I thought, you know what, if I go into a lot more detail I could make this a long form video. I'm going to go into a lot more detail to make this a total beginner's guide to basic woodworking. I don't want to sound big-headed or anything, but I am self-taught in a lot of what I do here in the shed, and that's because I found it to be quite a lot of common sense. However, I appreciate that there will be people out there who don't necessarily find it common sense and who would like some more detailed guidance on how to get into woodworking. So that's what I'm going to try and do today. So if you, like me, think you're fairly competent at woodworking without having any guidance, then go ahead and click off the video. But if you're a total newbie to the skill, first of all, welcome, and thank you for choosing such a great skill to try and have a little go at. I'll invite you to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what we do today, and let's get on. So yes, in a lot of my videos you'll often see sequences like this. Rapid fire shots of me doing sawing and drilling and driving of screws, just one after the other in quick succession. And that's because I often do a lot of the same processes over and over again in my videos, and I don't want the content to get boring, so I do that to try and make it more interesting and exciting. However, I don't ever say what's really going through my head during those times, and the sort of process that I go through. So in today's video, the aim is to take you through step by step what exactly is going through my head for the benefit of a total beginner. And the first step really, as soon as I know what it is I'm going to make, be it any one of these things that you can see popping up on the screen now, is to make a plan. Now a lot of the time I do this in my head, but if you want to, you can do it on paper, because often it does help to actually put your ideas down and lay everything out where you can see them. So let's get started with that. So assuming I wanted to make a pencil pot for all of my pens and pencils in the shed, which I've only recently added to, so clearly this doesn't need to be very big. First thing that comes to mind for me is I've either got wood or metal to make it out of, and that will determine what shape it is. I did consider initially with this to maybe get a bit of metal pipe and use that, but I don't have any metal big enough. None of my tube has a big enough diameter. Got it! So that means I have to turn to wood. So then I have lots of things to consider. I need to consider the size of the pot, which as we know is not very big. I need to consider how the pieces of wood are going to join up to each other. I need to consider what wood to actually use, whether that be hard or soft, and also whether that be plank, or I could even try and make it out of a solid piece of wood if I wanted to. Then I need to consider what I actually have available, how it's going to be best for me to cut it based on speed and ease and using the right tool for the job. And finally, the end result. How do I want this to actually look? Is there something specific? Because if I'm making this for somebody, I obviously need to consider whether they will like it. Whereas if it's just me, the only person I need to consult on the end result is myself. So I already know what size I really want to make it. I already know that I want to make it out of planks really, and definitely softwood, because softwood is a lot easier to come by, it's a lot easier to work with, it's going to make the job a bit quicker, and also it's only really necessary to use softwood for a project like this. It's not going to have really a high surface finish, nor is it going to need a lot of strength. So softwood is going to be perfectly appropriate. So I will just really use some of the scrap pallet wood that I have in the shed here, which also means that that's done, and we can also know that our joins are going to be simple butting up joins where we have one board and then another board just coming up to it at 90 degrees. We've already done what wood I have. How to cut it? This will mean that I automatically go to the handsaw or the table saw if I need to make a rip cut, and the end result and look is going to be a lot like a lot of the other things I made, like this box here, with screws, bits of wood with marks on it, and maybe a bit of mold, a bit of black for rust, that kind of rustic, handmade, bodge job together stuff that I do all the time. So like I said, I would already have in my head at this point an idea of how I'm going to do it, but for the benefit of a total beginner, I think I'd probably draw it out something like this. That's what we're going to end up with. Given that my pencils are on average only about 6 inches long, we don't need the whole pencil to fall into the pot, so this could be about 4 to 5 inches tall. Given the amount that we've got here, it could probably be, I don't know, 3 inches square. And if we take a zoom in to one of the joins here and look at a plan view, that is looking down on the top of the item, we're going to have boards coming together like this, and then another board at a right angle like this. And that means that the best way for me to join this together is going to be to put screws in through this direction. The size of this pot is also going to mean that I don't need very thick pallet wood. And the other thing that automatically pops into my mind when I've drawn this is the fact that with my boards butting up like this, I'm going to want to assemble it like this. Having a board here with another one butting on like that, which means that the next one butts on like this, and the next one butts on like that. No, I've done that wrong. Like this. And that also means that if we go back to a side view, we'll end up with a join like this on each corner, with the one board vertically, and then that's the edge of the next board. And there's also going to be an edge of another board behind, which means we're going to want 2 or 3 screws in the side here, and I'm going to want to make them nice and symmetrical on each corner, just to please the eye. And the last thing I'm going to want to consider is the bottom of this pot. So given that we're doing this design, essentially I'm just going to need a square of wood at the bottom. But the thing we need to consider here is, am I going to put the square of wood on the table and then put the pot on top of it, or am I going to put the pot and then sit the bottom of it up inside underneath? That's what I'm going to go for today, again just for how it looks, but that means I need to consider the thickness of this board in the overall height of the pot, given that I need 4.5 inches, say, for the pens and pencils. I need to add on an additional board width in here to the length of these boards so that we can account for the bottom that's going to go inside. It also means I can't drop this bottom screw here too low, or I'll be running into the base of the pot, which is going to be in here. So that really is the first step of any project that I do here in the shed, is to make a plan, either in my head or sometimes I will do it on paper. And step 2 is going to be to choose the wood. Okay, so like I said, we have quite a wide variety of wood to choose from here. And also the other thing I often do is I'll be rummaging through this pile, looking for a bit of wood that I need, and then suddenly I remember, no, I have more longer wood stored outside the shed that won't fit indoors. So it's always good, another thing to consider is to really consider all of the resources you have available, not just looking at the one pile. So this box here is full of little scrappy offcuts that I keep for various different things, often making little sticks to mix up paint or glue with. And then any other shorter offcuts that I don't want to keep on the floor, but I might still use. The only hardwood that I have is oak in here. Now, believe me when I say that at the start of when I got into woodworking and that kind of thing, I couldn't tell one wood from the other. And I still can't really, but what I can do now is identify oak quite easily. So I know that this is oak, this here is oak, and I can probably tell you where all the oak is in this pile. Everything else is softwood, be that pallet wood that I have salvaged, well, not all of it's salvaged, but be it that pallet wood that I've disassembled, or other bits and pieces that I've got from God knows where. But the point is, this stuff is hard and very, well, not difficult to work with, but it's harder to work with, and generally I use it for the nicer projects, the stuff that I want to go to a really nice, pretty finish, and then everything else we use softwood. It is literally soft. You can mark this with your fingernail. You can't mark this with your fingernail. And it's, like I say, a lot easier to work with. It breaks easier, but it's easier to put screws into it. It's easier to cut, and it's also lighter and therefore more suitable for most things. In terms of our pencil pot, we've already said that we want it to be 3 inches square. Now I do mean that to be 3 inches in total, not the internal diameter, which means that I can look for 3-inch boards. So this is a 3-inch board, and there's probably another one back here, and even in here, that's 4, that's 3, that one's 3 inches, this is 3 inches as well, and that's all we've really got in there. So just to take these 3 pieces as an example, now what I'm going to do is look at what the material is actually like. We want the boards to be straight, otherwise our pieces aren't going to go flush together. So immediately, if you look down the end of that, that is pretty pringly, as I like to call it. It's a bit warped. And so we're immediately going to discount that, not to mention the fact that there's glue from another project on it, and it's also got holes in the end, and also the grain structure, if you look at the end there, is not very tight. It's full of holes, which is just part of how softwood goes, but it means that this is going to be more likely to split on us. So this is going to probably end up being firewood or a mixing stick of some kind. Maybe a wedge or a scrapey thing. This piece is straighter, again a little bit warped, but it's also quite short. I won't be able to get all of the bits that I need for the pot out of this. And also I've used it in the past, so I've planed off that end for some reason, so it's got no right angles on this side. This one again is fine, but it was a pallet wood board taken from the edge of the tree. If you look there, it's got curvy edges on this side, which, like I say, we want this to be a nice rectangular stock that we're using, so I probably won't use this one. And looking at these two, any of these would be fine, either one, but this one has a bit of a dirty, skanky side on that side, so I could just flip it round, or I could use this nice clean one here. In terms of what it actually is, like I said, I don't really know. It could be pine, spruce, conifer, that kind of thing. That's what I mean by softwood, is that's what the kind of tree that it comes from, as opposed to a hardwood tree like the oak. But like I say, it doesn't really matter. Wood is wood at the end of the day. If you can put a mark in it with your fingernail, then it means it's softwood. It also tends to have a nice Christmassy smell if it's softwood, piney, and often it has a bit more sap in it, but doesn't really matter. If it works, it works. It's going to be easy to work with, and it's more appropriate for the job than a nice bit of hardwood. Now with our wood chosen, we can start to make our components and mark up for them. So I'm going to immediately look at this board and know that I've got holes from where the pallet nails were in either end and the middle. So I'm going to take my speed square, donated to me by my uncle. It's only made of plastic, but most importantly, it gives you a 90-degree surface, and it has this little T-shaped edge there that you could use to hook on the edge of the wood. So I'm going to hook it on the edge of the wood like this, and then I know that this line that I'm about to draw here is nice and square. So I'm going to bring it up just to where the nails are and draw a straight line with my carpenter's pencil. No idea where these come from. It would be probably interesting for me to do some research about why carpenter's pencils are more flat and rectangular like this. But yeah, using my carpenter's pencil, but again, nothing wrong with a normal pencil, to put a nice straight mark on. And that's what I'm going to then cut to get rid of that, those holes there. Then moving on, I think, yeah, 4.5 inches will be fine. But then I do need to add on an extra board thickness, 5/8 of an inch, or about 17.5 millimeters. So I'll add that on to the length of what we're going to cut, and then make another little mark here for the length, and then using our speed square again to mark off one side of our little rectangular prism cuboid shaped pencil pot, because we're going to need 4 sides and the base. So I'll mark those up now. Okay, then I've marked out side 1, 2, 3 and 4 and the base, and I've labelled it as such so that we don't get confused. This is oversized, I haven't measured it accurately, but I knew that I didn't have enough space in here to make the 4th side, so I thought, well, there's plenty here for the base. Just made another mark, plenty of distance away from these holes again, and then put the 4th one over here in the fresh wood. So we're going to make a cut on each of these lines, and it's also important to note, probably another reason why the carpenter's pencil is so thick and why it makes quite a thick line in comparison to that of, say, a normal pencil, is because you have to consider the width of your saw blade. A handsaw like this, which is a side note, also has its own built-in speed square that you can use if you don't have a proper one. Just lay that plastic edge up there on the wood, and there, draw along the back of your blade there. That'll give you a straight line as well, or a 45 on this one here. That's what I used before I got mine. Anyway, thickness of a blade is going to pretty much take up that line. Now, often I will draw the line and then cut just to the outside of it, but in this occasion, because I've put all my lines on at once, I need to make sure that I cut on each line so that I have the same size pieces of wood, otherwise they'll get progressively smaller. So often I will work by just putting a line on, cutting, and if I have it in the vise, I can just shift it along in the vise a bit each time, and then always cut just to the side of the wood. That's my preferred method of working, because then if I'm a little bit off the line, I've got room to shave it down with, say, the rasp to the line where the line was, rather than making sure that I'm absolutely on the line every time. It gives me some wiggle room. But because I've gone ahead a bit and drawn all my pieces on at the start, I'm now going to have to make sure I'm nice and accurate with my sawing. So we'll do my best there. So now we're ready to start cutting our components out, and I did say that we might end up using the table saw. That would have been if I only had board material that was too wide, and I wanted the 3 inches that I wanted, like I said. So I would have had to have cut down the length of the piece of wood to make it thinner. But in this instance, this board is going to be just fine, so we should get away with this. So all we're going to need to do is make cross cuts. Cross cuts. No. We're only going to need to make cross cuts against the grain of the wood. The grain runs this way, so we're going to go perpendicular to that, which means we're going to be just fine with a handsaw. Which just goes to show that when doing basic projects like this, you can get away with just having some basic tools like a saw, a drill, a pencil and a tape measure. You'll be absolutely fine. So I'm going to put my piece of wood in the vise. This is not the proper vise for the job really. I should have a carpenter's vise, a woodworking vise, which sits lower and is bigger. But this is the only vise I have, and it's what I've been using for years. Where I have it here means I can't put it where I want it to start with, but that's fine. I can just chop a bit of wood in half initially, and we're going to set to sawing. Now I've brought you closer here because I'm going to share with you some of my pet peeves when I see people sawing, and it annoys me because they're not quite doing it right. I have been taught how to saw properly, as thrilling as that sounds, but that's one thing that I haven't self-taught myself. So there is a proper method to sawing. It makes your life a lot easier. The key to starting sawing is to go slow. So we always drag backwards, and that gives you more control, and you start to make a very small indent in the wood like that. You often have to draw it back a couple of times to get a decent bit going before the saw will move forward on its own. Now you saw there the saw biting. That's the teeth starting to cut into the wood and makes more resistance. Now if I persevere here, I jump out and I go into my hand and cut myself, or I mess up and make a big gash in the wood. So we keep drawing back slowly until it'll start to go forward. Then you can start to saw. Next thing that people do is this, whacking through it, and also putting a lot of downward pressure on the blade. So when they are sawing, are trying to push the blade down like this. All that will do is tire you out, wear your hand out, work you up into a sweat, all unnecessarily. It'll also give you a gash cut. The saw is designed to cut wood. It has teeth offset, which means every other tooth is lent to the right, and then all the ones in between is lent to the left. That's called the set, and that means that it rips out a channel. That's where that tiny little thickness, of about a millimetre and a half, comes from. That's why you need to bear in mind whether you cut on the line or to one side, and it's what allows the saw to sink down into the wood. If you saw slowly and at a reasonable pace, the saw will do all the work for you. Just moving your hand back and forward like this, the teeth will cut the wood, remove the material, and gravity will pull it down. There's no need for you to press down. So that's one of the pet peeves I have. That there is perfectly adequate. The next thing is positioning. The saw, like I said, to cut properly, 9 times out of 10 you're going to be cutting perpendicular to the wood and perpendicular to the grain. That again will make your life easier. As a result, the saw, when it's going back and forth, wants to try and move in a perfectly straight line, which means that if you're stood at an angle like this, directly behind the saw, your hand and your arm is going to be straight, bend, right? That means it's going to be harder for you to do a straight line. So really you want to be stood off to the side a bit, feet nice and stable stance, and allowing your arm to do a nice straight motion underneath your shoulder. Obviously with a nice firm grip, often helps to put your forefinger out like this, and away we go. To return to starting the sawing, sorry to go over the same old ground, when we do our draw back, it can often be that the saw will move around like this when we're drawing it back, so often you put something there to guide it. Now it can be quite scary for beginners to do that, but it's all about confidence really, and knowing that the sharp bit of the saw is this bit and that it only cuts you if you do that. I will always put my hand here, and then this thumb is my guidey thumb. Put the saw where I want it, put my hand there with about an inch between my hand and the blade, and then I have a thumb or the tip of my thumb, maybe even a knuckle there, or even all the way up here, something that I can press against and keep the saw blade still. So as I'm pulling back there, I'm pulling both back and in towards my finger. Now my finger is well up on the side of the blade. I can rub my finger on the side of the blade all day and it won't cut me. It's only when it goes down there that I get cut. So having your hand here and using a finger or a thumb just up above the teeth, it's going to be absolutely fine and give you a nice strong thing to push against and give you a neat begin to your cut. Not to mention, of course, at this point we're moving the saw so slowly, you have all the control in the world. Keep your thumb exactly where it is on each drawback until we begin a cut. And when the saw starts moving forward, we only have to do a few strokes, and now I can move my hand away, well out of the way of the saw, and it will stay in the groove that it's already made. Setting us off ready to cut the material. And the last pet peeve before I shut up about sawing and get on with it is the usage of the full blade. The saw has teeth all the way from back here, underneath my hand, right to the tip here. Now if we only use the middle of the blade like this, what will happen is we'll blunt this middle part of the saw. The saw then has to be chucked out, or if it's an old-fashioned saw that can be resharpened, it has to be resharpened, and you've not even touched these ones. So the best practice is to try and do a full stroke of the saw. We want to be going right from where our hand is at the wood pretty much, all the way to the tip, and then all the way back forward. Obviously we don't want to come too far back and come out like this and smash into the wood. That tends to bend your saw and scare you a bit. And also, often the saw will bind up down the bottom end here. But it all comes with a little bit of practice. And to be honest, they make the saw a certain length for a reason. They make it to be a full arm stroke. If I move my hand comfortably all the way forward from this position, oh look, it's just at the end of the saw there, the back of the blade is on the wood. And if I bring my arm all the way comfortably back, funny old thing, we end up at the tip of the saw on the wood as well. So they're designed that way for a reason, and it makes your life a lot easier and a lot more efficient cutting, and it makes your saw last longer if you do a full arm stroke for each saw. One more thing that I've just thought of as I come to the end of this. Finishing your cut is very important. If you rush it and if you let the wood just drop, often you'll get a little jaggedy bit poking out, and I can probably find you a number of examples. That little bit sticking up on the corner there is from rushing the cut and making the wood fall away and split off a bit of material from in here. It leaves you a gash on the underside which you don't want. So the most crucial thing is when we're slow when we start the sawing and we're slow when we finish the sawing. Also, it helps to hold the bit of wood so that it doesn't just drop. So we slow down, still doing a full stroke nice and straight, I mean dead slow, and supporting the wood, not pulling it up like this because that will pinch your blade and you can't move it, so letting it fall but not letting it fall all the way. Nice and slow. And the sharper your saw is, the better it will cut through these last fibres. But just getting right down there, really slow, and eventually it'll come off. There you go, I've still got a little bit that's ripped off. That does tend to happen a lot with softwood. Wouldn't have happened with oak or something, but again, that's just part of using softwood. So you can minimise it a lot. It would have been a lot bigger if I'd have rushed through the cut. And one more thing about my beloved sawing is where you position the wood in the vise. I said about how this is the wrong vise for the job and how I had to cut the board in half first so that I could fit it in. But also, if you position your wood, say here, and try and make this cut, especially with a vise that's got a bit of movement in it like mine has, because it's only made for small things and I use it for bigger things, so I overstrain the screws and it now has a bit of wobble to it. Different story altogether. The wood will move as you cut it and your saw will bind, you'll have a hard time with it. The aim is always to be working as close to the vise as possible. So I will put this about here, make the handle out of the way, and this way when I finish the cut, there's a lot less movement in the vise. So there you go, perfect way to saw, in my opinion. Let's get on and actually do the rest of the cuts. Okay, now we need to consider our order of processes, because our next step is going to be to drill some holes for screws to join this together. However, we also need to get our base to final size. Now, if I go and cut a 3-inch square out of this, and then try and assemble the sides around it, chances are I'll have messed up my measurement somewhere, and the base will be too big and we won't get the sides to fit together properly. So I think it's going to be a lot easier to assemble the sides first, and then make a custom base that will fit into the bottom, because we can take this solid cuboid, measure these distances in here, and then make the base fit that. Marking up for drill holes doesn't have to be that difficult. You can often use the pieces of wood that you're going to end up putting together to draw your straight lines without needing a ruler or anything. So as I've got my pieces of wood in the configuration that I want, I know where my screws are going to go. So I can take these two here, lay them down like this, and if my edges are flush on the back side here, which I can just do with my fingers, and we're all lined up, I can just draw along this inside edge, although I am just going to spin this around. Just draw along like this. The other thing that's going to do is put my numbers on the inside, because I don't want people to see those on the outside. I don't want anybody to think I'm an idiot or anything. And then just repeat. Now, when drilling the holes, obviously we need to account at the bottom for our base, so we also need to mark up for that. So all of my screw holes for the sides are going to have to be above this line here, so we can't go in there. And I could just then punch a couple of holes in each side here, but if we want to be really nice and make it look proper good, we could measure the distance. So just take an overall measurement, which is going to be easiest there to say, I think, 11 centimeters, and then to work in, say, 2 centimeters from each end, and then obviously right in the middle of our line and the edge of the wood. This will make the pot in the end look nice and symmetrical, and it will mean that we have plenty of meat, plenty of strength around each screw when it's joined together to give it lots of strength. What I mean by that is, if I were to put a screw in here right at the very edge, chances are there's very little wood on the side here, so we'll end up ripping out, or the wood will split, and it won't be that strong. So we want to move in a little way so that we've got a nice distance of wood around all the sides of the screw hole to make it a nice strong join. So again, we can use our speed square just to put more straight lines on where all the holes are going to go. And then, yeah, measuring a couple of centimeters. I might even do 1.5 centimeters. Now we come to drilling, we also need to consider how exactly we're going to hold the wood while we drill it. Now here we have two options. I could either use my clamps to clamp the wood to the bench like this, which recently I have been doing quite a lot, or I could put it in the vise. Now the aim really with this is to obviously hold the wood still while we're drilling it, but also to make life easy so that we can drill straight. Obviously we don't want a squiffy hole, otherwise the screw will come out at a funny angle and won't necessarily go where we want it to. So we want to drill a nice perpendicular hole down through the wood, which means that we need to either be very good at holding the drill straight or have a nice flat surface to drill against. To be honest, in either of these configurations, if I'm holding the drill like this, I could go left to right or up and down, and if I'm drilling like this, I could do the same. So it doesn't make much difference, although recently I have been preferring this because I can get on top of the drill more and see where it's moving easier than here, because having the drill below my eye level in this position means it's more likely that I'm going to be off in this direction than I am here. So I think we might as well go for this method. So to take a deep dive into drills, this is mine, a Black & Decker. I believe my granddad actually bought it for my dad. My dad had it for years, for as long as I can remember. It terrified me as a child. And then he's since got cordless drills, because this one still obviously has a cable. And so this was just sat in the cupboard. It actually broke, and we ended up doing a bit of a restoration to it, put a new chuck on it, took it to bits, re-greased it, all that fun stuff, and now I have inherited it. It's also only got two settings of hammer or drill. Hammer is for masonry. Today we'll have it firmly set over to just to drill, and we'll be using brad point, I think it's brad point bits, wood bits. They look like this. Most commonly I drill either wood or stone, so I have in this pot my most commonly used wood and stone bits. Brad point bit is characterised by those 3 points there. I have in the past in a different video explained different types of drill bits, so you can go and watch that here, and I won't go into what other drill bits are today. So I've got my screws out so I can decide which ones of those are going to be appropriate for this job, and then that also lets me determine the size of drill bit that I need. This is the one I use all the time. I think it's 3mm. For general purpose use, it does the job perfectly. Punches through softwood really easy, and then it'll give us a nice convenient hole for putting the screws in. Assembling the pencil pot as we are like this, and in most woodwork that I do, this is how I will assemble wood, means that in order to stop the wood from splitting and to let the screw go in easily, means you need to put a pilot hole through this piece here, and then this one, the screw will go in on its own and doesn't split. Don't ask me how it works. I think it might be because of the slower speed that it's going at when it's going through the second bit, but for some reason the second bit you don't have to drill, the first bit you do. It's just how you do it. So we're going to get the bit into the drill, tighten the chuck up by hand, and make sure that the bit is seated nicely between the 3 jaws of the chuck, and then tighten it up either with the collar on the cordless drill that you may be using, or with the chuck key on this one. Uncoil the cable, plug her in, and then the last thing to do will be to put on some PPE before we get going, because of course we need to stay safe in the shed. In terms of PPE, I've got my old glasses on. I could put my safety goggles on, but I'm not going to bother because I know we're only drilling. And also I am going to put on my old ear duffs. I won't need a mask, I don't think either. We're not going to be sending dust everywhere. It's only going to be some little drilling chips. And then to return to the drilling itself, obviously we just put the drill on here, and we make sure that we're nice and straight, and then we take a nice firm grip of it. I like to put a hand on the top here, and then obviously one hand on the handle with the trigger, and we're going to start slowly spinning it. We don't just go like this. We want to make a nice controlled start. Put it on, start nice and slowly, little bursts. Get yourself a hole established, and then because it's softwood, if I want to, I can just punch through like this. It really doesn't take that much effort at all. But what happens there is I put a ring from where the chuck slams into the wood, and also on the back side, I burst out, where's it gone? Little jaggedy bits like that, which we want to try and avoid. More often than not, it does happen on softwood anyway, because again, it's another characteristic of softwood, like that little splintery bit you get when sawing, but we can minimise it by taking our time. If I go in and get the drill up to speed, and I'll have to do this because it's so loud, I'll have to talk and then do it, but if I get the drill up to speed and then let the gravity and the weight of the drill just pull itself slowly through, I'll get a lot less spitting out and chipping of the wood on the back side. So you can see there how little time that took, and on the back side you have a lot less chipping out on that one. So we'll get clamped back in on the bits that we're actually going to do now and make our drill holes. Okay, that's done that. 2 holes to hold the sides together, and I've also put a hole in the bottom of each one so that we can go through the sides and into the piece that's going to make up the bottom of the pot. So to hold the pot together, we've already decided to use screws. Now we could have used glue, we could have used nails, but most commonly now, what with screws being so good, that's what we use because they're just way better than nails. Nails actually tend to pull out over time as the wood expands and contracts, not to mention the fact that I haven't actually got a hammer at the minute. So we're going to be using screws, and that means we're going to need some sort of screwdriver. Now, before I had an impact driver like this, I put all my screws in by hand. That's why I got such wham forearms, because I was using a screwdriver, a normal one, manually to do that. But now I have the luxury of an impact driver which I bought, Ryobi, and essentially this is just a big electric screwdriver. So it makes it much easier and quicker to put screws in, and the screws that I tend to use come from one of these 2 boxes here. Starting with our plan for the project, we also need to consider which screws are going to be appropriate in terms of both length, width, and the sort of head that they have. A lot of screws now will have what's called a posi drive head, and I'll bring you in close here and show you the difference between a posi and a Phillips. This is how screws started out, flathead screws with just a single line. Those you would tighten up with a flat bladed screwdriver like this one. However, now with more modern screws, I hate flat-headed screws because they tend to slip out. They mash the heads really easy. It's a lot more secure and easy to use Phillips head screws. Now, this isn't the best example. Sorry, it's a bit rusty, but I don't actually have many Phillips because we've since even moved on from Phillips head screws. But they just had a simple cross, and for those, you would use a Phillips head screwdriver. Now that means these ones here with just a simple plus, not with the little square inside that you can see there. So you can also see on the actual bit itself that between each of those little flutes, the little blades of the bit, there is nothing. It's just a simple plus sign for the plus head. Now, since then, they've even moved on to what's called posi drive screws. They have a secondary 45-degree, you can just see there, sorry about the light, the little extra cross that's in the head there. There's the big main one, and then like northeast, southwest, and all the others, there are additional points, and for those you need additional points in the bit. You can see there's the additional little diamond shape just above my fingernail, whereas the Phillips don't have them. So nearly all screws now are posi drive, needing a posi drive bit. And the only other thing that you might need to consider is the size. Depending on the size of the screw, you might have a number 1, which is smaller, or a number 2, which is pretty much everything, and then a number 3, which is big and fat. I've actually lost my number 3 posi, but there's a number 1, focus, number 1 Phillips, number 2 and number 3. You can see how the head gets tiny little square, more medium, and then big. And then there's a tiny little posi and a medium-sized posi. So the number 2 posi is what we use all the time. And again, that corresponds to the size of screw. But even nowadays, what they've started to do is put a head on each screw that will be a number 2 posi, no matter how big or small the screw is. Both of these heads here will fit onto a number 2 posi drive bit. Even though the screws themselves are massive, because that saves you having to change over your bit all the time. So it really is really convenient now and quick and easy to put screws into wood. So for our project today, the most convenient size screw I have really are these little gold ones. Given the size of the board that we've got to go through, if I were to bury these screws into, they sat just a little bit below flush there, about there, push them right in with the driver, we'd have plenty sticking out to go into the opposing board. However, I do have these screws laying about, which have a rounded head to the top, and the wood will sit on them here like this. So they will sit proud, but they're designed to do that. They just have a certain special application. And instead of having curvy shoulders here to the screw, which help to pull the screw down and sit it perfectly flush with the surface of the wood like this. No, come on. Like this, sorry. These ones, like I say, are designed to sit on top, and I think for the look of it, we might as well use these screws up because I won't use them anywhere else. So we'll put these in and also give us plenty more meat, nice strong screw there to get into both bits of wood and hold them nice and firmly together. So that's what we're going to use today, and funny old thing, number 2 posi. If we return to our piece of wood which we put holes in earlier, I can demonstrate to you how best to use an impact driver. Now a lot of this again comes with some experience, because I find the impact driver needs quite a lot of feel in terms of how quickly to drive screws in. This is just a normal screw, it's got the curvy shoulders like I showed you on the little gold one. It's not the one that we're going to be using today, it's just bigger. And I will have to put a block of wood underneath to make my point, but I can just drive this straight in nice and quick. But it's less controlled, and more often than not I see a lot of beginners, people that have worked with me before, people that haven't used an impact driver. If you don't put the right amount of pressure in, this can happen. They'll start to mash the head of the screw because they're not putting enough pressure in, or they'll snap off one of the teeth on the bit. So I find it easier to do little bursts of driving with the screwdriver, like this. It's nice and controlled. means I can make sure that no gap forms when the screw pushes through the first piece and starts to push on the secondary piece. Obviously you need to have it clamped tight together so you don't get a gap. Going slow like this means that you can make sure that that gap doesn't happen. And the thing's running out of power, fantastic. But the other thing that this obviously has is the hammer function. So that means that you can put the extra power and it will start to punch on the screw as well as turn it and really drive it into the wood, hence why it's called the driver. And it means that you can drive the screws in right flush. Although of course for the ones we're using today that won't be necessary because they're going to sit above the top anyway. So let me just give a minute and put this on charge because I forgot to, and then we'll get to putting the actual pencil pot together. One other thing I forgot to say, sorry, is that hammer function on the driver comes in automatically. Again, with better drivers than mine, you can alter the speed that it will run at. DeWalt ones and Milwaukee, etc. Ryobi, this one just does the one speed, but I don't mind. And the hammer comes in automatically when the resistance in the screw gets to a certain point. Then it will start punching on the back of it as well as turning. Before that, it will let you have the level of control that you need. Okay, hopefully that's enough charge. I've selected the amount of screws that we're going to need. And call me a wussy, but I also do tend to put my earduffs on when I'm using the driver because that hammer function is quite loud. You could tell how it was affecting the microphone in the last few clips. It's really loud and then my voice sounded quiet because the microphone had to adjust. So in terms of putting these together, let me just make sure I'm doing it the right way still. So we can either just do this by hand or you can make life easier for yourself and clamp these together. Nothing wrong with that. Make sure everything's lined up. And then it's as simple really as taking your driver, starting a screw off, and then start to drive in your screws. Make sure we've got no gap. If a gap does form, often you can get rid of it by backing out the screw, because by that point you'll have started to put a hole in the secondary piece of wood. So back out the screw so that it's only in the first piece, reclamp your wood nice and tight, and then go for it again nice and slow. You should get less of a gap. So let's do a second one here, using my hand as well as the clamp to hold the two together. And there we go, two bits of wood joined together. Well, that's annoying. That doesn't normally happen, but we have had a little split there in the second bit, but shouldn't be too much of a problem. Should still be strong overall. So now we just move on and repeat and put the other bits on. Well, I must say, folks, I am quite disappointed. 3 of my screws in the top there split the secondary board. I suppose that can only be down to the fact that I put them quite close to the end and the top of the boards here. Like I said about making sure you have plenty of meat, I thought that would be enough. Apparently it wasn't, so there we go. Even in my great wisdom, I'm still making mistakes and still learning. But the thing is still strong. Our nice little cuboid here. It's a little bit squiff, admittedly, because again, maybe I didn't choose quite the right board. I think one of the edges had a bit of a slope to it, so they're not quite sitting at perfect right angles, but we have still pulled it into what I think is acceptable with the screws, and like I say, it's nice and strong. So the next and final step really is going to be to make our base fit and screw it in and call it there. So if we grab something to write on and something to write with, and our tape measure, 53mm by 55, because there you go, it's not perfectly square. Just write that down so I don't forget. 53 by 55. I'll mark this up on here, and we might have to go and get the table saw out after all to make that the right size in this direction. Just for that one little cut, but hey ho, at least I get to use my table saw. There you go, I've put it too high, it's wobbling all over the shop. Let's get it nice and low, get more control. You know what, looking at it, I can't be bothered to get the table saw out just for this one cut. And you can of course saw down the grain of wood. It tends to take a bit more time because a saw is designed to snip each fibre as it goes across them perpendicularly of the wood. So when you're trying to drive the saw down into with the grain of the wood, it doesn't like it as much. That's what an axe is designed to do, is split apart those fibres along with the direction that they're going in. But you can still do it, it takes a bit longer. Same process, start off nice and slow. And you often feel as if you're not making as much progress because, like I say, it's not what the saw is designed to do. It tends to take a bit longer and it tends to not feel as good, but you can still do it if you persevere. Okay, there's a little cube. I'll try and make him a little bit oversized so that he's got a nice snug fit, which means I just need to use my mallet here and just persuade him in. I think I might need to take just a little slither off, but I'm going to do that with the rasp. This is essentially a file for wood. Again, this was my granddad's, but I refurbished the handle. It's like a file for wood in that it's got big chunky teeth to deal with the more fibrous material that wood is. So I can just use this here to see if that's any better. We're getting close. So now just drive my screws in. And there we go. At long last, all of my pens and pencils have a home. So there we go, folks. Hopefully that was a nice little informative tutorial for total beginner woodworkers on how to get into making projects of the kind of thing that I do. And the sort of methods that I use, the processes I go through, the things I'm considering when I'm working, to hopefully get a good result every time. I hope I didn't bore you too much, and like I said at the start, if you enjoyed the video, do consider giving it a like and subscribing. We'll try and get some more of this kind of content coming soon. Yeah, thank you for watching. Goodbye.